Kia has a new flagship in Australia. This is the new Kia EV9. It's a 7-seat SUV with full EV power and 3 different grades available, priced from, get this, $97,000 before on-road costs. Now, you'd have to argue this is the most family-friendly electric vehicle that we've seen on our shores, not just from Kia, but from any manufacturer. But the key question here is it really worthy of the $100,000 price tag? Let's find out. The EV9 marks uncharted territory for Kia and for EVs in general locally. Short of the $200,000 Mercedes-Benz EQS SUV, this is the first of many anticipated full-size 7-seat electric SUV offerings from a mainstream manufacturer. And it isn't backwards about its pricing or its positioning, aligning with better-known combustion SUVs on price, including the Toyota Land Cruiser 300 series and the Land Rover Defender 110. Now, there are 3 different EV9 models available in Australia. So the Air opens proceedings at $97,000 before on-road costs. We then move up to the mid-level dual motor Earth before arriving at this. This is the dual motor GT line flagship, which costs $121,000 before on-road costs. Now, at that price, it is by far the most expensive Kia we've seen in Australia to date, but the manufacturer justifies the price with the amount of equipment that you get as standard. Big screens, first-rate safety, over-the-air updates, and much more. The EV9 fits the bill as Kia's new flagship. Dimensionally, the EV9 has the same on-road footprint as a Land Cruiser 300 series, but with a much bigger wheelbase. Its boxy design is punctuated by sharp angular lines and an inherent focus on aerodynamics. And the square rear end isn't just for show either, as we'll get to in a moment. The EV9 scores the same frequency selective damper technology already employed in the EV6, as well as self-leveling suspension technology. In terms of powertrain, the dual motor GT line offers up 283 kilowatts and 700 newton meters in total, drawing power from a mammoth 99.8 kilowatt hour battery. The same dual motor drivetrain powers the mid-level Earth, while the entry Air makes do with a single motor mounted on the rear axle. Total claimed range for the EV9 GT line is 505 kilometers. Kia says it will take 9 hours to charge from 0 to 80% using a 7 kilowatt AC connection, or as little as 24 minutes when hooked up to a 350 kilowatt DC charger. The EV9 architecture is said to be compatible with both 400 volt and 800 volt charging, and it also offers vehicle to load functionality to charge small electric appliances. Now, clearly the EV9 is a vehicle that is big on the small details, and the interior is a terrific reflection of that. They have thought of everything from the placement of the gear shifter, which is at the side of the steering column here, to all the layout of the switch gear, cup holders. There are 10 cup holders inside this cabin, USB-C ports are plenty. Everything is really nicely executed. We'll get to the infotainment system in a moment, but I guess in terms of where you sit in the cabin, the materials they've used, it's really thoughtfully executed. It's also said to be quite sustainable with the use of the materials as well. Soft contact points, plenty of incidental storage. I will say the execution isn't quite perfect though. I mean, I typically would like a deeper center console than that. Instead, you've got this big boxy console with lots of storage underneath and lots of storage from the rear, but not much practical space at the front here. The other bone of contention here, especially with the GT line, is the standard fitment of these digital rear view mirrors. I get what they're there for, it's aerodynamics, it obviously makes a statement, but a lot of people just aren't going to like them in practice. Now, in terms of infotainment, what we have are 2 12.3 inch digital screens, one in the center display here and one in the instrument cluster. They are separated by a separate 5-inch display for all of your HVAC controls, like your air conditioning. The layout, the legibility and everything is really good. The center screen is easy to use. You've obviously got touchscreen functionality. Look at the status of the battery. You can go through infotainment and all the rest. You've also got these handy shortcuts down the bottom here, which allow you to navigate the screen as well. And they give you like a digital response in terms of feedback to know that you've selected that particular item. Likewise, The instrument cluster is legible, it's easy to use, as is the head-up display in this flagship GT line. It means you can kind of glance your eyes down from the road, look at key information and look back up without being overly distracted. My one little gripe with this car, and it is kind of overcome by this bank of switchgear below here, is this HVAC screen. It's partially blocked by the steering wheel here.
Most of its technology comes in at the base level, but some nice to have features like a 360-degree camera are only available in higher spec versions. Safety is likewise well sorted, covering all key bases out of the box.
For me, the EV9 introduces genuine family-friendly proportions to the EV segment, and the second row space is a great demonstration of that. When I jump inside, it actually reminds me a lot of the Kia Carnival. Really wide door aperture to get in and out of, a nice open glasshouse design, and plenty of space. Being an EV, the floor is completely flat, but you also have plenty of knee room, plenty of shoulder room, plenty of headroom as well. Great incidental storage and some really nifty features in this GT line. Heated and ventilated seats, the sunshades, drop down armrest, you name it, they've thought of it. Now, while everyone might not love the boxy design of the EV9, there's clearly method in Kia's madness. Check out this rear seat space. Quite a decent open glass house for a third row seating. Genuine legroom as well. This isn't a 5+2 seater, it is a genuine 7-seater. I've got the second row seats set to my height and I can clearly fit inside here in the rear. I've got a couple of inches of room, I've got tow room and I've got headroom as well. This is a really well thought out space and surprisingly more roomy than I'd anticipated.
Rear seat occupants are treated to separate HVAC controls located in the roof lighting, as well as separate tilt and sliding adjustment for the comfortable synthetic seats. Seating aside, the boot area offers usable proportions for luggage or prams alike. One uncharacteristic missing feature for a Kia though is no spare tyre. You have to make do with a tyre inflation kit. The EV9 Air offers a measly 900 kilogram braked towing capacity, while dual motor variants increase to 2.5 tonnes.
So clearly the EV9 is a vehicle that really sweats the 1% element. I spoke about it when we were chatting interior before, but things like the tactility of the window switchgear, I don't remember the switchgear feeling that nice before. The finish of the steering wheel, this really does take Kia to new heights. So by rights, it should really do the same with the driving experience. It does. The modulation of the pedals, the steering, everything else, the ride, it feels super refined, but there are a couple of exceptions and it doesn't take long to find them. You hear that? That's the first of them. There are two really annoying safety features with the EV9. Unfortunately, it and a host of other Kia, Genesis and Hyundai models require them to comply with the latest 2023 NCAP safety guidelines. Basically, every time you go over the signposted speed limit, the car beeps at you. Every time you take your eyes off the road, even a cursory glance to the rear seat to see what your kids are doing, you've got another function that beeps at you because it deems that you're not looking at the road properly. These are very small, very almost like teething issues in everyday life. But if you were living with this car, I have to say, it could become quite annoying. For me and for a lot of other people, it's a potential deal breaker. It's that bad. So if you are considering an EV9, take one for a lap of the block first to see what I'm talking about, because it could be a deal breaker for you as well. You can turn these features off. I've made a shortcut here in the steering wheel. It takes you to another menu and you can go through and turn everything off, but you have to do it every time you're driving the car. Anyway, rant out of the way. What's it like to drive? In a couple of words, it feels clinical and it feels polished. Through really mixed surfaces that we're covering at the moment, the car's suspension is working super well to keep everything in check, everything in control. There are no nasty surprises despite a curb weight approaching 3 tonnes. Occasionally you'll get a fairly hefty deflection in the rear when you've got an extended section of crumbled roads. If it's sort of finished off by a sharp bump at the end, you'll get a bit of an unwanted deflection every now and then, but for 99% of the time, this feels polished and it feels really well executed. And that comes back to the team at Kia Australia that do a lot of the tuning. The drivetrain, like I said, is super well modulated through the right pedal. You've got a nice linear feel and consistency to the pedal when you pull away. There's no sudden jerkiness. And thanks to these 4-stage paddles on the steering wheel, you're able to modulate the strength of the regen brakes as well. I like electric cars that just feel as though they're casually loping along the road. They're not bound up or tight in terms of that regen braking system. And when you have this set to the most minimal regen braking, it just seems to float along the road, a lot like a combustion car. If you listen to the acoustics inside the cabin, obviously the drivetrain is quiet, but the cabin environment is really serene too. You have that underlying ride, which is really calm and soothing, and you have minimal road noise entering the cabin. Kia actually tried to benchmark cars like the Audi e-tron SUV, that's a $160,000 SUV, in terms of the NVH qualities of this vehicle, and it's really shown in the final product. Dynamically, the EV9 is super impressive, but ultimately it doesn't really reset any class benchmarks. Obviously for a 7-seat SUV, it almost defies physics with what it does, but it doesn't really give you any great sensation in terms of feedback. It all feels a little bit anodyne and clinical. It does everything really well, it does everything it ought to, but you kind of walk away feeling a little bit vanilla about the entire driving experience. I think for that reason, the mid-level Earth probably makes a lot more sense than the flagship GT. I mean, yes, this will do 0 to 100 in 5.3 seconds. Does it really need to in a day-to-day basis? No, not really. I think the Earth is probably a better proposition. When it comes to ride and handling and everything else, my genuine opinion is that the base level Air is probably the best of the three in terms of its overall agility and the way that it conducts itself through corners. Obviously, you have about 150 kilograms less weight over the nose, and you seem to have a little bit more structural integrity as well. It doesn't feel like you get the same sort of unwanted rigidity issues in the front of the EV9 Air as opposed to the dual motor Earth and the flagship GT line. This feels really good over the nose. It turns sharply, it does everything you want it to, and that body control is quite commendable, but it does feel a little bit kind of undernourished in the front end. It feels like as if you could almost have a little bit more bracing there to really hold up the structural integrity of this car. But to the 90% of people that are going to be driving this as a family 7-seater, it does exactly as advertised. It's polished, it's quiet, there's no dramas with the drivetrain, and everything feels really special in the hands as well. Just probably misses that little nth degree that we've seen in vehicles like the Kia EV6 GT, but I reckon this is obviously a much harder assignment to get right dynamically. In terms of range, that's one of the real talking points with the EV9, that, you know, it sort of benchmarks itself as a real usable 500 kilometer range EV. The great news here is that we have had no troubles matching the claims on tests. So as such, in a GT line that we're driving at the moment, you are probably going to get close to the 505 kilometer range that is advertised. That is music to my ears, and it'll probably be music to a lot of the people who are sort of sweating that EV component in the EV9. Is it going to be enough? Is it going to hold up? Will it cover my day-to-day treks? Well, based on our first impression, it definitely does. So in summarising, this is a super impressive EV. It's a super impressive 7-seater as well. It's the first time that we've really seen those two combined in an SUV of this size.
So refined is the EV9 on country roads, it feels as though you're travelling much slower than the speedo suggests. It definitely feels most at home touring and on the open road.
Clearly the EV9 blazes uncharted territory in Australia, and that's not just for Kia, it's for EVs in general. It's exciting in the same sense that any 7-seat SUV is exciting. It's spacious, it's practical, it has great tech inside, and it's quite easy to drive on the road. Ultimately, it doesn't really reset any dynamic benchmarks. It's probably a little bit too clinical for that. But as an EV, as a family-friendly EV, it works quite well. Key question is though, is it really worth $100,000? If I'm completely honest, I'm kind of on the fence given what you can get for the equivalent internal combustion model. But really, it's up to the individual. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below.